In the hush before dawn, where shadows clung like lovers to the stone walls of forgotten spires, a single flame flickered, not of fire, but of a soul condemned to burn. Elara Voss had always been a whisper in the wind-swept valleys of Eldridge, a healer whose hands mended bones and brewed elixirs from moonlit herbs. At 28, she carried the weight of a life fractured by loss. Her mother, burned as a witch when Elara was but a girl, leaving her orphaned and adrift in a world that saw salvation in suspicion. Abandoned by the villagers who once sought her cures, disillusioned by a betrothed who fled her cursed touch, Elara's days blurred into nights of quiet defiance. She desired nothing now but the earth's cool embrace, free from the fever that gnawed at her lungs, a wasting sickness that painted her cheeks with hollow shadows and turned each breath into a labored prayer. Yet in her solitude, she clung to an old silver locket, its chain worn thin, holding a faded portrait of her mother, a talisman against the encroaching dark. The decree had come at midnight, scrawled on parchment stained with the ink of fear. Brujería, they called it, witchcraft, for the miracles she wrought in the hidden glens, drawing life from the dying earth. The inquisitors, cloaked in the rigid black of the Eldridge clergy, had dragged her from her thatched cottage, their torches sputtering like accusatory eyes. Now, bound to a stake in the town square, the air hung heavy with the scent of damp wood and impending rain. The pyre loomed before her, a pyramid of splintered logs piled high, their rough textures biting into her bare feet through the thin shift she wore. Mist curled from the cobblestones, veiling the gathered crowd in ghostly silhouettes. Farmers with pitchforks, priests intoning psalms, children wide-eyed in the torchlight. Elara's wrists chafed against the coarse rope, the fibers drawing thin lines of blood that trickled warm down her skin. She lifted her gaze to the eastern horizon, where the sky bruised purple, reluctant to yield to the sun. The locket rested against her collarbone, cool as a forgotten promise. In its reflection, she saw not just her mother's face, but her own, eyes like storm-tossed seas, hair tangled with the night's dew. How had it come to this? She had healed the blacksmith's son from plague, eased the Lord's feverish wife, yet whispers of sorcery poisoned the well of gratitude. The sickness in her chest flared, a sharp ache that made her cough into the chill, tasting iron on her tongue. Death, that invisible specter, had shadowed her for months. Now it wore the face of flames. From the crowd's murmur rose a deeper hush, as if the wind itself held its breath. Figures parted like smoke, revealing a path to the pyre's edge. He emerged then, not as a savior from the tales of old, but as a shadow given form. Tall, cloaked in velvet, the color of midnight, his presence commanding silence without a word. King Draven Thorn, sovereign of the veiled realms beyond the mortal veil, though none here knew his true name. Immortal for centuries, he bore the curse of eternity, etched in his marble-pale skin and eyes like polished obsidian, depths that had witnessed empires crumble and lovers turn to dust. At what age he had chosen undeath, he no longer recalled precisely, perhaps in the blood-soaked fields of a forgotten war, when mercy's blade spared him only to bind him to endless night. Solitary by necessity, his heart scarred by the guilt of those he had turned, those he had failed to save. Ethical in his isolation, he wandered the fringes of human folly, drawn to the broken as a moth to flame, seeking redemption in the faces that mirrored his own lost humanity. Draven's boots echoed softly on the stone, each step measured, deliberate, as if time bent to his will. The crowd recoiled, whispers of demon and nightwalker slithering through the air like serpents. He stopped mere feet from the pyre, his cloak pooling around him like spilled ink. Up close, Elara saw the fine lines of weariness at his mouth, the subtle gleam of a signet ring on his finger, an ancient band of blackened silver, engraved with thorns entwining a rose, symbol of loves lost to the ages. His gaze met hers, not with hunger, but with a quiet recognition, as if he had waited lifetimes for this moment. "Why?" she rasped, her voice threading through the damp air, raw from the night's ordeal. The rope bit deeper as she strained forward, the locket swinging like a pendulum. Rational thought warred within her. This stranger, this apparition, could be delusion born of fever, or the devil come to claim what the fire would leave. Draven inclined his head, his voice a low timbre that resonated like distant thunder over the moors. "Because some flames are not meant to consume, but to illuminate." He extended a hand, gloved in fine leather, not touching the wood. Yet the logs seemed to shudder, as if alive with unspoken power. The Inquisitor, a gaunt man with eyes like shriveled raisins, stepped forward, cross raised. "Begone, foul one! This witch meets her judgment at dawn." But Draven's eyes never left Alara's. In them, she glimpsed not eternity's void, but a profound solitude, a guilt that mirrored her own abandonment. The first blush of light crept over the hills, gilding the mist in gold. Her heart pounded, a frantic drum against her ribs, the sickness twisting like a knife. Love. No, impossible. This was survival's cruel jest, a rationalization against the inevitable burn. Yet as the torchbearer approached, flame dancing in his grasp, Draven whispered words lost to the wind, ancient and binding. The fire kindled, hungry licks of orange probing the base. Heat kissed Alara's ankles, promising agony, but Draven's ring caught the light, the thorny rose seeming to pulse. In that instant, choice loomed. Not just hers, but his, the immortal who had sworn never to interfere again. The crowd gasped as shadows lengthened unnaturally, the dawn hesitating. Would he let the flames take her? Or offer the curse of his blood, turning death's embrace into something far more enduring? And as the first true blaze roared to life, Alara felt not fear, but a treacherous pull toward the darkness in his eyes, a redemption she dared not name, even as the world began to blur in smoke and shadow. The flames clawed upward, their heat a voracious maw that seared the air and painted Alara's skin in ruddy strokes. Smoke coiled like serpents from the pyre's heart, stinging her eyes until tears carved salty paths down her soot-kissed cheeks. The crowd's chants swelled, a guttural hymn to purity, laced with the metallic tang of fear sweat and unburnt wood. Her lungs rebelled, the fever's grip tightening with each ragged inhale, as if the sickness within her conspired with the blaze without. The locket burned hot against her chest, a fleeting anchor in the inferno's roar. Draven moved then, not with the frantic grace of a rescuer from mortal tales, but with the inexorable calm of one who had danced with death across centuries. His gloved hand sliced through the air, a gesture both elegant and arcane, and the shadows at the pyre's base stirred. They twisted, unnaturally alive, weaving into tendrils that smothered the flames' eager tongues. The fire hissed in protest, steam rising where mist met embers, but it faltered, retreating to sullen glows amid the logs. Gasps rippled through the throng. The Inquisitor's cross trembling in his fist as he bellowed invocations that dissolved into the thickening fog. Alara's vision swam, the world fracturing into shards of light and dark. Was this salvation or sorcery's deeper trap? Her mind, fogged by pain and delirium, rationalized it as hallucination, the fever's final mercy before the end. Yet Draven's presence anchored her, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the haze. He ascended the pyre in fluid strides, the wood groaning beneath his boots like ancient bones shifting in their grave. Up close, his scent invaded her senses. Cool earth after rain, mingled with the faint, coppery undercurrent of blood long denied. No hunger gleamed in his gaze, only a weary resolve, etched deeper than the lines time had spared his immortal face. "Trust the night," he murmured, his voice a velvet rumble that cut through the chaos, low enough for her ears alone. His fingers, deft and unyielding, worked at the ropes binding her wrists. The fibers parted with a snap, freeing her arms in a rush of pins and needles agony. She slumped against him instinctively, her body betraying the war in her soul, repulsion at the chill of his touch warring with the inexplicable warmth it kindled in her core. The sickness flared, a cough racking her frame, flecks of blood staining her lips. Death hovered, its invisible fingers brushing her throat, whispering of release. The crowd surged then, pitchforks and torches thrusting forward like accusatory spears. Demon. "Seize the witch and her patron!" the Inquisitor shrieked, his voice cracking into hysteria. Draven shielded her with his cloak, the velvet enveloping her like a shroud, its texture soft yet impenetrable. He lifted her effortlessly, her weight nothing to his preternatural strength, and descended the pyre in a blur that left the logs smoldering but unignited. Shadows billowed around them, a protective veil drawn from the encroaching dawn, muffling the shouts into distant echoes. They fled into the mist-shrouded alleys of Eldridge, the town's spires looming like jagged teeth against the paling sky. Draven's strides were silent, purposeful, carrying her through narrow passages where rain-slicked stones gleamed under sporadic lantern light. The air grew cooler, laced with the brine of the nearby sea and the faint rot of tidal marshes. Ilara's head lolled against his shoulder, her breath shallow, each one a labored symphony of wheeze and sigh. Rational thought clawed back. This was madness, fleeing with a stranger who reeked of the grave. Love? Absurdity. This was desperation's delusion, a dying woman's fancy spun from fear. He bore her to the outskirts, where the village yielded to wild moors, vast expanses of heather and gorse, whipped by a wind that moaned like lost souls. An ancient ruin squatted there, half swallowed by ivy and time, the remnants of a forgotten abbey, its arched windows blind with creeping vines, walls pitted by centuries of storm. Draven slipped through a crumbling doorway, the scent of damp stone and moss enveloping them. Inside, the space unfolded into a shadowed sanctuary, lit by a single candelabrum whose flames danced in golden defiance of the gloom. Wax dripped in slow, rhythmic tears onto a scarred oak table, pooling like congealed blood. He laid her upon a pallet of furs and faded tapestries, the textures yielding softly beneath her aching form. Ilara's eyes fluttered open, taking in the chamber's gothic splendor, tapestries frayed at the edges, depicting thorn-wreathed roses in threads of crimson and gold. A massive mirror, its silver surface veined with age, reflecting fractured moonlight through a high, lancet window. The wind sighed against the panes, a haunting counterpoint to the distant crash of waves. Draven knelt beside her, removing his gloves with deliberate care, revealing hands pale and veined like marble, marked by faint scars that spoke of battles long faded. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice a threadbare rasp, pushing herself up on elbows that trembled. The locket slipped free, dangling between them, its portrait catching the candlelight, a mother's eyes mirroring Ilara's own defiance. "Draven Thorn," he replied, his tone laced with the weight of untold years. "A king of shadows, bound by choices I can neither undo nor fully escape." He paused, his gaze tracing the hollows of her face, the fever's flush staining her skin. Guilt shadowed his features, a echo of the immortals he had condemned to similar fates. Lovers turned to ash in his arms. Wars waged in the name of a throne that demanded solitude. Ethical to his core, he had sworn off the turning, the blood gift that blurred life and eternity. Yet here, in her broken gaze, he saw his own reflection. Abandonment's scar, the desire for redemption veiled in despair. Ilara coughed again, the sound wet and ominous, blood flecking her palm. She wiped it away, staring at the crimson smear. "You saved me from fire, only to deliver me to what? Your curse?" Rationalization surged, He was no hero, but a predator cloaked in mercy, drawn to her weakness as wolves to the lame. Yet the pull defied logic, an inevitable tether forged in that dawn-lit stare. Draven's signet ring gleamed as he reached for a vial from a hidden alcove, its contents dark and viscous, shimmering like liquid night. Not a curse, but a choice. The fever claims you, as it did so many before. My blood. It could mend what mortality breaks. But eternity is no balm. It's a mirror to every regret, every loss, etched eternal. His voice cracked, the first fracture in his composure, revealing the loneliness that gnawed at his immortal heart. He had wandered realms where kingdoms rose and fell, betrayals carving deeper than any blade, yet never had guilt felt so immediate, so human. The wind howled louder, rattling the window like skeletal fingers. Outside, the first birdsong pierced the mist, a fragile herald of day. Ilara's hand brushed his, accidental yet electric, the contact sending a shiver through them both. In that touch, she glimpsed not damnation, but a shadowed light, redemption's whisper amid the thorns. But as the vial hovered near her lips, the abbey door shuddered under a heavy fist, voices from the village echoing in pursuit. Choice crystallized, drink and transform, or face recaptures flames, with Draven's own vow teetering on the edge of ruin. Her heart thundered, the sickness a dying ember, as she met his eyes once more. The thorny rose on his ring, pulsing like a shared heartbeat in the gathering storm. The pounding at the abbey door reverberated through the stone like the heartbeat of an awakening beast, each thud sending tremors up Ilara's spine. Dust sifted from the rafters, fine as grave silt, catching the candlelight in fleeting motes that danced like condemned souls. The wind outside had turned savage, whipping against the lancet window with a fury that rattled the leaded panes, their glass groaning under the assault. Voices filtered through the cracks, harsh, accusatory barks from the villagers, laced with the Inquisitor's venomous chants. "Witch, harborer of demons, open in the name of the light!" Draven's hand froze, the vial of dark elixir poised inches from Ilara's lips, its surface rippling like a captured storm. His obsidian eyes flicked to the door, a flicker of ancient calculation crossing his features, sharpening the guilt that etched his brow. Centuries of evasion had honed his instincts. He could vanish into the shadows, spirit her away to realms where dawn held no dominion. But the choice before him was not flight. It was the fracture of his own vows. He, who had turned nun since the bloodied throne rooms of his youth, where ambition's blade had carved betrayal into his eternity. Solitary king of veiled courts, marked by the ghosts of lovers he had failed, Draven had sworn isolation as penance. Ethical restraint bound him tighter than any chain, yet here, in this ruin's hush, her fevered gaze unraveled it all. Ilara's breath hitched, the sickness coiling in her chest like barbed wire, each cough a wet rasp that painted her palm anew with crimson. The locket lay open on the furs, her mother's portrait staring up with eyes that held no answers, only the echo of a similar pyre long ago. Rationality surged through her haze. This stranger, this Draven Thorn, offered not salvation, but a deeper abyss. Drink his blood, and what? Become a shadow like him, eternal witness to a world's cruelties, her humanity sloughed off like dead skin? The villagers' shouts grew bolder, boots scraping the threshold, the door splintering under a ram's insistent blow. Fear clawed at her, but beneath it, an inevitable pull stirred. The cool certainty of his touch against the fire's remembered heat, a redemption she resisted naming as anything akin to longing. "No," she whispered, her voice fraying like the tapestry's edges, pushing weakly at his wrist. The contact lingered, her fingers brushing the cool marble of his skin, sending an unwelcome spark through her veins. It was madness, this tether, born of desperation, not desire. She was broken, yes, orphaned by flames, abandoned by those she healed, her body a vessel for decay. But eternity? A curse for the guilty, not the forsaken. Draven's expression softened, not with offense, but with the profound ache of recognition. He had seen it before, in the eyes of soldiers on bloodied fields, in the fevered pleas of plague-ridden courts, the human dance between surrender and defiance. "The dawn advances," he said, his timbre low and resonant, like thunder rolling over distant moors. He set the vial aside on the scarred oak table, where wax from the candelabrum pooled around it, congealing into thorny shapes that mirrored his ring. The silver band gleamed, the entwined rose and thorns pulsing faintly, as if alive with the weight of choices unmade. "They come for you, Alara Voss. My shadows can shield us, but only for so long. The choice is yours, not mine to force." Guilt shadowed his words, a solitary king's confession. He had interfered once, in the pyre's blaze, drawn by the locket's glint, a symbol of loss that echoed his own. Wars had raged in his name, political betrayals fracturing immortal alliances, all because he had once chosen eternity for love, only to watch it wither into regret. Now redemption whispered through her pain, tempting him to break his isolation anew. The door buckled, wood cracking with a sharp report that echoed like a gunshot in the chamber. Torchlight pierced the gloom, casting elongated shadows that clawed across the floor. Ilara's heart thundered, a frantic rhythm against her ribs, the fever blurring the edges of her vision into veils of red and gold. She glimpsed the villagers through the widening gap, faces twisted in righteous fury, pitchforks glinting like fangs, the Inquisitor's cross aloft, its silver chain swinging like a noose. Death loomed tangible now, not the invisible specter of her illness, but a mob's brutal hand, promising recapture and a slower burn. Draven rose fluidly, his cloak swirling like liquid night, positioning himself between her and the breach. No blade in hand, yet power hummed in the air around him, subtle, ethical, a king's restraint against unleashing the storm within. "Stay behind me," he murmured, his back to her, broad and unyielding as ancient oak. Alara struggled upright, the furs tangling around her legs like reluctant lovers, her shift clinging damply to her sweat-slicked skin. The texture of the room assaulted her senses, the rough weave of faded tapestries under her palms, the metallic tang of blood on her tongue, the chill draft carrying the sea's brine and the mob's acrid fear. As the door gave way in a shower of splinters, the intruders surged in, 5 men, armed with iron and zeal, their breaths heaving in the confined space. The Inquisitor led, his gaunt face alight with fanatic gleam, eyes narrowing on Draven. "Abomination! You dare defy the divine pyre?" A farmer lunged with a pitchfork, its tines whistling through the air, but Draven sidestepped with preternatural grace, the weapon embedding in a tapestry with a thud. Shadows stirred at his command, coiling from the corners like living smoke, wrapping around the attacker's ankles, tripping them into heaps on the mossy stone. Alara watched, transfixed, as the ritual of confrontation unfolded. Not a battle of blades, but a dance of light and dark. Candle flames guttered, casting Draven's profile in stark relief. The subtle curve of his jaw, the weariness in his stance. One villager swung a torch, its flame hissing as it met shadow, extinguished in a puff of acrid smoke. The Inquisitor chanted, flinging holy water that sizzled harmlessly against Draven's cloak, the droplets beating like tears on velvet. In the chaos, Alara's gaze fell to the vial, still untouched, its contents swirling with promise and peril. The sickness clawed deeper, a cough seizing her, forcing her to double over, blood flecking the furs. Rationalization crumbled. Survival demanded more than resistance. It begged the inevitable. Draven dispatched the last with a precise shove, shadows binding them in silken restraints, their groans muffled as he sealed the door with a whispered incantation. The abbey fell silent once more, save for the wind's mournful sigh and the distant roar of waves. He turned to her, breathing steady. No mark of exertion on his immortal form, yet his eyes held a new fracture, the guilt of violence, however restrained, echoing his past betrayals in shadowed courts. Kneeling again, he retrieved the vial, holding it out like an offering. "The choice, Ilara. Drink and live as I do, eternal but haunted, or face them renewed and let fate claim what it will." His free hand brushed her cheek, the touch cool as moonlight on fevered skin, igniting that treacherous spark. Love resisted, yet inevitable, bloomed in the space between them, a redemption forged in fire's aftermath, shadowed by the thorny rose that bound his finger. She stared at the vial, the room's textures pressing in, the velvet black of his cloak, the golden flicker of candles, the white frost of fear on the window. Her lips parted, the words forming in a whisper as the first rays of dawn pierced the mist outside, gilding the ruins in treacherous light. But before she could speak, a deeper rumble echoed from the moors. Hoofbeats, more pursuers, the king's own ethical solitude, fracturing under the weight of an approaching war. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The dawn's first tendrils slithered through the abbey's fractured window, gilding the stone in hues of reluctant gold, as if the sun itself hesitated to witness the unfolding fray. Ilara's lips hovered at the vial's rim, the dark elixir's scent rising like aged wine laced with iron, tempting, profane, a whisper of eternity's bitter edge. Her fingers trembled around Draven's, the cool precision of his skin a stark counterpoint to the fever's blaze within her. The thorny rose on his signet ring caught the light, its etched petals seeming to unfurl, a symbol of loves that bloomed only to bleed. Rationality clawed at her core. This was no romance spun from fever dreams, but a desperate bargain with the shadows, her broken life traded for an immortal solitude that mirrored his own guilt-ridden exile. The rumble from the moors swelled into thunder, hoofbeats pounding the earth like war drums, heralding an ancient grudge. Draven's head snapped toward the sound, his obsidian eyes narrowing, the vial slipping from her grasp to roll across the firs, untouched. "Not villagers," he murmured, his voice a low growl threaded with recognition. "My own kind. The court's hounds have scented interference." He rose, cloak swirling in a cascade of midnight velvet, the fabric whispering against the mossy floor like secrets exchanged in the dark. Guilt flickered across his features, deeper now, carving lines that spoke of betrayals long buried, political machinations in veiled thrones where he, as king, had decreed isolations to spare his kind the pain of human entanglements. Yet here he stood, his ethical vow fracturing for a healer's defiant gaze. Ilara pushed herself upright, the pallet's furs clinging to her damp shift like reluctant ghosts, their coarse wool scraping her fevered skin. The sickness surged, a vice around her lungs, forcing a cough that echoed in the chamber, blood-tinged spittle flecking the air. She clutched the locket, its silver chain biting into her palm, the portrait within a blurred anchor amid the haze. Abandoned once by flame and kin, now pursued by shadows she couldn't name. Death circled closer, its invisible form manifesting in the tremor of her limbs, the metallic tang coating her tongue. "Your kind?" she rasped, the words scraping her throat raw. Resistance flared. This pull toward him was no love, but survival's cruel illusion, rationalized as necessity in the face of recapture's pyre. Draven moved to the window, peering through the ivy-veiled panes, the wind's howl carrying the distant clash of steel and the guttural cries of immortal riders. "Vampiric enforcers from the Thorn Court," he explained, his tone laced with the weariness of centuries. "Loyal to a throne I left fractured. They hunt anomalies, mortals who glimpse our veil, or kings who dare meddle in human fates. His hand rested on the sill, scarred knuckles whitening, memories flooding unbidden. Wars waged in shadowed halls, where betrayal had seen allies turn to ash for lesser transgressions. He had chosen eternity in a battlefield's crimson embrace, spared by a rival's mercy only to ascend a crown stained with the blood of those he loved. Solitary now, his ethics a self-imposed chain, yet her presence unraveled it, tempting redemption through a choice he dared not make alone. The abbey's door shuddered anew, not from mortal fists, but a force more insidious, shadows bleeding under the threshold like ink from a spilled chalice. The air thickened, charged with the ozone scent of preternatural storm, candles guttering as drafts snuffed their flames one by one. Alara's heart hammered, a frantic pulse against her ribs, the room's textures assaulting her, the chill draft raising gooseflesh on her arms, the faint drip of wax echoing like tears, the velvet black of Draven's cloak absorbing the dying light. Footsteps echoed outside, not the clumsy thud of villagers, but a silken glide accompanied by the jingle of silver spurs and the low whinny of spectral steeds. The door burst inward without touch, hinges sighing in surrender as three figures materialized from the gloom. Tall, pale as moonlit marble, cloaked in embroidered brocade that shimmered with threads of silver and crimson. Their leader, a woman with eyes like fractured ice and hair bound in a coronet of thorns, stepped forward, her presence radiating the cold authority of court intrigue. "Draven Thorn," she intoned, her voice a silken blade. "Exiled king, you breach the edict. A mortal pyre is no stage for your remorse." Her gaze slid to Alara, appraising, hungry, not for blood, but for the leverage of forbidden attachment. Flanking her were two enforcers, their faces masked in shadow, hands resting on hilts of blades that hummed with enchanted steel. Draven positioned himself before Alara, his stance unyielding, the signet ring glinting as he clenched his fist. "Lyrian," he acknowledged, the name heavy with history, once a consort in his court's tangled webs, turned by his own hand in a war-torn night, only to betray him for power's throne. "This is no breach. The girl bears no mark of our world. Lies woven with truth. His interference at the pyre had rippled through the veil, drawing these hunters like moths to an illicit flame. Guilt gnawed deeper, his solitary path now a magnet for the political tempests he had fled. Alliances shattered, realms teetering on the edge of immortal war. Lyrian's laugh was a chill cascade, echoing off the stones like shattering glass. "Yet you shield her, as you once shielded me from the sun's judgment. The court whispers of your weakness, old king. Hand her over, or face the thorn's judgment." She advanced, shadows coiling at her feet like loyal serpents, the air humming with the ritual of confrontation. One enforcer lunged, blade flashing in an arc of silver, but Draven countered with fluid precision, his hand catching the wrist in a grip that cracked bone without sound. The shadows he commanded surged, binding the attacker in writhing tendrils, muffling cries into silence. Ilara shrank back, the furs tangling around her like chains, the vial rolling perilously close to the fray. The sickness twisted, a fresh cough racking her frame, vision blurring into veils of red. This was no mere pursuit. It was a revelation of Draven's shadowed legacy, king of betrayals, seeker of redemption in the broken. Rationalization crumbled under the chaos. His touch earlier, cool and inevitable, now seemed a harbinger of deeper entanglement, love's curse masquerading as salvation. Death pressed in, tangible in the clash of steel and the scent of spilled ichor, dark blood that sizzled on the stone. Lyrian circled, her coronet of thorns casting jagged shadows, eyes locked on Draven with a mix of scorn and lingering ache. "Choose, Thorn. Your isolation ends here, or drags us all into war's embrace." The second enforcer struck from the flank, a dagger grazing Draven's arm. tearing velvet and drawing a line of black blood that smoked faintly. He staggered, but not from pain. From the echo of old wounds, the guilt of turning her, of failing her in the court's political crucibles. In the melee's heart, Ilara's hand found the vial, its cool glass a lifeline amid the storm. The wind howled through the breach, rain lashing the window in silver sheets, mingling with the metallic reek of battle. Draven glanced back, his eyes meeting hers across the fray, a silent plea, a shared dilemma. Drink and bind their fates in eternity's thorns, refuse and invite the court's wrath upon them both. As Lyrian's shadows lashed out, coiling toward Ilara like vengeful vines, the healer's lips parted on a gasp, the elixir trembling at her mouth. But in that suspended breath, a deeper rumble shook the ruins, reinforcements, or something far more ancient stirring from the moor's veiled depths, threatening to unearth secrets that could doom not just them, but the fragile veil between worlds. The shadows lashed out like thorns from a poisoned vine, Lyrian's will manifesting in writhing tendrils that sliced through the air toward Ilara, their edges whispering promises of oblivion. The ruins trembled under the deeper rumble from the moors, a subterranean growl that vibrated through the stone floor, dislodging pebbles that skittered like fleeing insects across the moss. Rain lashed the breached window in relentless sheets, turning the lancet panes into fractured mirrors of silver and storm, their leaded frames groaning as if the abbey itself wept for the choices unraveling within. Ilara's fingers tightened around the vial, the glass cool and unyielding against her fevered palm, its dark contents swirling with the weight of eternity's unspoken bargains. The metallic tang of spilled ichor mingled with the brine of the sea, coating her tongue as another cough seized her, the sickness, a serpent uncoiling in her chest, squeezing until stars burst behind her eyes. Draven whirled, his cloak a vortex of midnight that intercepted the shadows mid-strike, absorbing them into its velvet folds with a hiss like quenching steel. Black blood trailed from the gash on his arm, smoking faintly as it seeped into the furs, the scent sharp and coppery, evoking battlefields long buried under centuries of regret. His obsidian eyes met Lyrian's fractured ice, a clash of old wounds reopening, betrayals in thorn-wreathed halls where she had risen on the ruins of his mercy, her turning a gift twisted into ambition's blade. "Enough," he commanded, his voice a resonant thunder that stilled the fray for a breath, ethical restraint fraying at the edges like the tapestry's gilded threads. He had built his solitude on such vows. No more turns, no entanglements to ignite the immortal wars that had claimed so many. Yet here, guarding a mortal's fragile light, he glimpsed the lie of his isolation, a king's guilt, eternal as the rose etched on his ring, blooming amid thorns of lost loves and shattered thrones. Lyrian advanced, her coronet casting jagged shadows that danced across the scarred oak table, the candelabram's flames guttering low, wax pooling in crimson rivulets that mirrored the blood on the floor. Her enforcers regrouped, one clutching a shattered wrist, the other drawing a second blade that hummed with veiled enchantments, its edge gleaming like moonlight on frost. "Weakness suits you poorly, Thorn," she sneered, her silken timbre laced with the ache of their shared history, a consort discarded in political tempests, her loyalty bartered for a fractured crown. "The court senses your meddling. The veil thins because of it. Hand her to us, and perhaps the enforcers spare your shadowed throne." Her gaze flicked to Ilara, appraising the healer's hollow cheeks, the locket's silver glint against her sweat-dampened shift. Hunger stirred there, not for flesh, but for the leverage of a Dampir's potential birth. A half-life born of forbidden union, a weapon in the endless wars of immortal realms. Ilara's breath came in shallow gasps, the vial trembling in her grip as the room's textures pressed in, the rough wool of the furs chafing her knees, the chill draft raising welts on her exposed skin, the distant crash of waves a dirge to her fading mortality. Rational thought warred within her, This was no poetic redemption, but a descent into Draven's haunted mirror, where every choice echoed with the ghosts of those who had drunk before and withered in eternity's grasp. She was broken, yes, orphaned by flames that mirrored this very pyre, abandoned by a world that branded her curse, her body a decaying vessel for elixirs she could no longer brew. Yet the pull toward him defied logic, inevitable as the dawn's inexorable creep, a love resisted in the name of self-preservation, rationalized as mere survival. Death hovered, its invisible cloak brushing her shoulders, whispering of the earth's quiet embrace over this storm of shadows and steel. The rumble intensified, the moors outside erupting in a cacophony of spectral howls and the thunder of unseen hooves, as if the land itself rebelled against the veil's breach. Draven lunged, intercepting Lyrian's next shadow lash with a sweep of his arm, the impact sending shockwaves that toppled the candelabrum, flames scattering like dying stars across the stone. Wax splattered, hardening into thorny blooms that caught the encroaching light, their golden hues bleeding into the black ichor. He grappled with an enforcer, their forms blurring in a dance of preternatural grace, fists meeting with muffled cracks, cloaks tearing to reveal pale skin veined with ancient scars. Lyrian circled, her blade flashing in an arc that grazed Draven's side, drawing another line of smoking blood that sizzled on the damp floor. Pain flickered in his eyes, not from the wound, but from the philosophical fracture. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, yet in saving her, he risked dragging her into the very solitude he had sworn to endure alone. In the chaos's eye, Alara rose unsteadily, the vial clutched like a talisman, her bare feet slipping on the slick stone, the cold seeping into her bones like grave chill. The locket swung free, its chain a pendulum marking the seconds of her dilemma, the mother's eyes within urging defiance, not surrender. "Draven!" she cried, her voice raw, threading through the clash like a healer's plea. He glanced back, his face a mask of weary resolve, guilt etching deeper as Lyrian's shadows coiled anew, aiming for Alara's throat. In that suspended instant, revelation dawned. His ethical isolation was no shield, but a cage forged from past failures, wars ignited by attachments, betrayals that had seen Dhampir offspring hunted as abominations, realms teetering on the edge of cataclysm. To offer her eternity was to invite such storms, yet to withhold it was to condemn her light to the mob's flames or her body's decay. With a surge of desperate will, Alara uncorked the vial, the elixir's scent blooming, earthy and vital, laced with the promise of mended lungs and endless nights. Lyrian's tendrils grazed her arm, drawing a thin line of blood that burned like fire's echo. But Draven shattered the assault with a roared incantation, shadows exploding outward in a protective gale. The enforcers reeled, one crumpling against the wall with a thud that echoed like final judgment, the other fleeing into the rain-lashed gloom. Lyrian paused, her ice eyes widening in calculation, the coronet's thorns glinting as she assessed the shift, the potential of a turned healer, a queen to fracture Draven's throne anew. Alara brought the vial to her lips, the liquid cool as moonlight sliding down her throat, igniting a fire that chased the sickness from her veins. It spread, transformative and agonizing, her vision sharpening to crystalline clarity. The room's details assaulting her anew. The velvet tear in Draven's cloak, the crimson wax thorns, the white foam of waves beyond. Strength flooded her limbs, but with it came the curse's whisper, eternity's weight, memories not her own flickering at the edges. Draven's ascension in bloodied fields, lovers lost to dawn, the solitary guilt of a king who chose not to die alone. Love crystallized in that ritual, resisted no longer. Inevitable as the bond forming between them, a redemption shadowed by the thorny rose, blooming in the midst of war's encroaching roar. But as the change took hold, Lyrian's laugh cut the air, sharp as shattering glass. "Foolish king, you've birthed the storm." The rumble crested, the ruins' walls cracking as ancient forces stirred from the moors, not reinforcements, but a rift in the veil itself, unleashing whispers of forgotten Dhampir legions and the court's full wrath. Draven pulled Alara close, his touch now a shared chill, their eyes locking in silent vow amid the gathering tempest. Yet in her newborn gaze, a moral fracture gleamed. Had she chosen life, or merely traded one pyre for the flames of immortal betrayal? As the ground split open with a seismic groan, shadows and light warring in cataclysmic embrace, the true cost of their union began to unfold, threatening to consume not just them, but the fragile world between mortality and night. The rift tore open with a primordial scream, the abbey's stone floor fracturing like brittle bone under the assault of warring forces. Jagged fissures snaked outward from the threshold, exhaling plumes of acrid mist that reeked of unearthed earth and forgotten blood, centuries of veiled secrets clawing their way to the surface. Rain hammered the ruins in silver fury, mingling with the ichor-slick puddles on the mossy tiles, each drop a cold kiss against Alara's newly sensitized skin. The transformation coursed through her veins like liquid fire tempered by frost, mending the fever's hollows, sharpening her senses to the symphony of chaos. The thunderous crack of splitting rock, Lyrian's silken snarl, Draven's steady breath beside her, now a shared rhythm in their eternal tether. Alara staggered to her feet, the furs falling away like shed mortality, her shift clinging translucent to her form, textured by the storm's brine. Strength bloomed within, unyielding as ancient roots, yet laced with the curse's whisper. A profound ache, not of body, but soul. Memories flickered at her edges, unbidden. Draven's first ascension amid war-torn fields, the metallic flood of blood under a blood moon, lovers' faces dissolving into dust across endless nights. She was no longer the broken healer, orphaned by flames and abandoned by a faithless world. She was remade, a Dhampir shadow, her humanity's embers glowing amid immortal night. The locket hung heavy against her chest, its silver now a bridge between what was and what endured, the portrait within sharpening to crystalline clarity, her mother's eyes, defiant mirrors of her own. Lyrian recoiled from the rift's maw, her coronet of thorns askew, fractured ice in her gaze, melting into calculation's chill. The enforcer at her side lay crumpled, shadows still binding his form in writhing knots, while the other had vanished into the tempest, a coward's retreat. "What have you wrought, Thorn?" she hissed, her voice slicing through the gale like a blade through velvet. Shadows coiled at her command, but they faltered, diluted by the veil's unraveling, the air humming with the rift's pull, drawing spectral wisps from the moors, echoes of Dhampir legions long hunted, half-lives born of forbidden unions, their translucent forms howling in vengeful chorus. Political tempests of the Thorn Court surged in their wake, whispers of fractured alliances and brewing wars, all ignited by Draven's meddling mercy. Draven's arm encircled Alara's waist, his touch no longer alien, but intrinsic, a cool anchor amid the blaze of her rebirth. Black blood seeped from his wounds, staining the velvet of his cloak in abstract thorns that mirrored the ring on his finger, the rose unfurling its petals in the storm's erratic light, a symbol of redemptions bought with curses. Guilt shadowed his obsidian eyes, deeper than the fissures below, for he had sworn solitude after the court's betrayals, turning Lyrian in a desperate bid for alliance, only to watch her ambition shatter realms into civil strife. Ethical king no more, he had interfered, offering Alara the blood gift that blurred life and eternity, transforming suffering into shared haunting. "The veil mends or breaks on choices like ours," he murmured, his timbre resonant against her ear, carrying the philosophical weight of centuries. "I chose not to let you burn, as I once chose not to die alone. But eternity demands its toll, love as both light and chain." Alara met his gaze, the inevitable bond solidifying like frost on glass, resisted no longer in the ritual's wake. Love? It bloomed here, not in fevered fancy, but in the raw texture of survival, the chill of his skin against her warming flesh, the shared pulse of immortal hearts, the moral fracture of what she had become. Rationalization dissolved. She had chosen this, not for him alone, but for the defiance echoing her mother's pyre, a healer's hands now wielding shadows, mending not herbs, but the veil's wounds. Yet the curse gnawed. Eternity's mirror reflected every loss amplified, her abandonment eternalized, Draven's guilt a perpetual shadow in their union. Death lingered, invisible no more, woven into their veins as the rifts hunger, promising wars where Dhampir blood would paint thrones anew. Lyrian lunged, her blade a silver streak aimed at Alara's throat, shadows lashing like vipers in tow. But Alara moved with preternatural instinct, her hand snapping out to seize the wrist, the impact reverberating through bone with a crack that echoed the thunder. Strength surged, Dhampir vitality, twisting the attacker's arm aside, the dagger clattering into the fissure where it vanished in a swirl of mist. Lyrian staggered, eyes widening in shock at the healer's transformation. No mere mortal, but a potential queen, her blood a catalyst for the court's unraveling. Abomination, she spat, summoning a final torrent of shadows that billowed toward them, dark as spilled ink, textured with the chill of grave winds. Draven countered, his commanded gloom colliding with hers in a cataclysmic weave, the air crackling with ozone and the scent of scorched velvet. The rift widened, spectral Dhampir forms solidifying at its edge, ghostly warriors with eyes like Alara's, thorns etched into their pale skin, remnants of past forbidden loves hunted to extinction. They turned on Lyrian, a tide of vengeful mist that enveloped her, dragging her toward the abyss with ethereal grasps. Her scream pierced the storm, a silken wail fraying into silence as the Veil's guardians reclaimed their due, sealing the breach with a seismic shudder that knit the stone anew. The rain eased to a mournful patter, the moors falling quiet save for the waves' distant dirge, the ruins standing sentinel in the gathering dawn. Draven pulled Alara close, their forms silhouetted against the lancet window where light filtered through in hesitant gold, gilding the thorny rose on his ring. The transformation's fire ebbed, leaving a profound stillness, the beauty of suffering transmuted into enduring light, redemption's fragile bloom amid eternity's shadows. She traced the ring's engraving, her touch lingering on the petals, feeling the pulse of shared memories, his wars, her pyres, choices intertwined. "We are cursed and saved," she whispered, her voice steady now, laced with the intimacy of immortals. Yet in her newborn heart, the ethical dilemma lingered, a love that redeemed through transformation, but invited tempests yet to come, where political thorns would test their bond against the world's fragile veil. As the sun crested the horizon, bathing the abbey in warm defiance of the night, they stepped into the moors together, hand in hand, the locket's chain linking them like fate's unyielding thread. Eternity stretched before them, not as void, but as canvas for choices unmade. Love's redemption a beacon in the gathering storm of immortal wars. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned.